This particular part of this lesson came from Lyle Shanks partially when he had a whole video program on how to help families budget their money and how to control their spending and things like that. It was a class that he and George taught to kind of help families out. And it was basically, it was on this concept of stewardship. And from that, I decided they had some scripture in there, but not a lot. And it intrigued me. So I went and started really looking up this concept of stewardship. And it just opened my eyes. Pastor Bob had me teach on it as a sermon on a Wednesday night a bunch of years ago. It's a whole nother way of thinking, and I designed for that sermon, I designed this. There was actually a whole set of slides, so you have a copy of this in front of you now. And if you look at it, I put God at the top. Of course, there's a heart of love in God. He loves us so much. And so in the first box, we have God's provision for you. And in the second box, God's prosperity. Now notice, God's prosperity is now a bigger line. He's doubled his blessings to you, hasn't he? And in the third line, or third box up here, we're now learning that we need to give back to God. And so our little green arrow is now going back to God, a tenth. But in the last box, we have stewardship. God's still blessing us, but the green line is getting bigger from the U side. And notice the faces in the U change on the last box. In the last box, U now has a heart. There's a change in heart that goes on. And you've learned something. You've learned something deeper. So what is this stewardship thing all about? And the word steward actually comes from the Hebrew word ben. And if any of you know what ben means in Hebrew, you know, Ben-Hur and David Ben-Gurion, Ben means son. You've now come to the point of realizing you're a son of God. You are his son. You are inheriting his wealth. You are the adopted son that we read in Romans 8. It means anointed one, appointed one, worthy servant, mighty champion, soldier, valiant one. Another definition of it means to be a builder, to obtain children, to repair, to hold or possess, to be a partner. You've now walked into a whole new realm to where you realize that you have a really high position with God. Real quickly, in Genesis 15, Abraham had a great steward. His name was Eliezer. He gave Eliezer everything. And in fact, at one point, Abraham was wondering if Eliezer was going to be his inheritor. He asked God, "You haven't given me a son, God, so is it to be Eliezer?" And God said, "No." And at another time, he gives Eliezer 10 camels loaded up with gold and silver and all the wealth of Abraham, and he sends him back to get a daughter for his son. And the Eliezer goes trotting off across the desert, and you probably all know the story how he got a daughter from Laban's family, basically from where they'd come, and brought her back for his son. But he turned all of his wealth over to his steward. And his steward had a high position, almost like a son. And he was to get a certain job done. Joseph, we had already talked about, was a steward. in Potiphar's house. He was a steward in the jail, and in a sense he became number 2 to Pharaoh. He was more than a steward there. Luke 12. Let's turn there. Luke 12. There are a lot of parables about stewards, of which we're going to have to probably cut some of them out. But Luke 12 gives us an example. Verse 41. Then Peter said unto him, Lord, speakest thou this parable unto us, and even to all? And the Lord said, Who then is a faithful and wise steward? This is more than a servant, however, whom his Lord shall make him ruler over all of his house, and give them their portion of meat in due season. Blessed is that servant whom his Lord, when he cometh, shall find so doing. Of a truth I say unto you, he that will make him ruler over all that he hath. That's our reward if we're good stewards. But if that servant or steward say in his heart, My Lord delayeth his coming. How many times have we said that? The Lord hasn't come back yet. When's he coming? Why is he delaying? And shall begin to beat the other men servants and maid servants, and to eat and drink and be drunken. He's not living a correct steward's life. The Lord of that servant will come in a day when he looketh not for him, and at an hour when he is not aware, and will cut him asunder. Cut him asunder. What's that sound like? Chop him, cut him in half with a sword? And will appoint him his portion with the unbelievers. Wow. That servant, which knew his Lord's will, and prepared not himself, neither did according to his will, shall be beaten with many stripes. The middle of verse 48 says, To whom much is given, much is required. Go over to Matthew 25. Matthew 25. So I think there's a warning about stewardship. We've got to keep, just because God's delayed and our life is going on the way it is right now, we got to be careful with our life, don't we? I don't want to be cut asunder by God. Luke 25:14. For the kingdom of heaven is as a man traveling into a far country. That's Jesus. He went into a far country. Off he went into heaven. Who called his own servants and delivered unto them his goods. And unto one he gave 5 talents. To one of the stewards, 5 talents. To another 2, to another 1. To every man according to his several abilities. And straightway he took his journey. Then he that received 5 talents went and traded the same, and he made 5 more. And I'm going to try to summarize this real quick. The guy who had 2 went and made 2 more. The guy who had 1, in verse 18, he says, he went and dug a hole in the earth and hid his Lord's money. Stuck in the earth. It did not grow. Did not collect interest. It just hid it in the earth. And he does it because he doesn't understand God.
He was afraid, wasn't he, or something like that?
Well, we're going to find out. He's a slothful servant. After a long time, the Lord finally came back, and he rewards the one with the 5 talents. And he said, well done, verse 21, good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful in a few things, I will make thee ruler over many things. In another translation, but not translation, but in another chapter in Luke 19, it actually says he'll be given control of cities during the millennial time. The guy who had 2 talents also got that same kind of reward. But look at verse 24. He that received the 1 talent came, and the Lord said, I knew thee. He's basically saying, I knew thee that thou art a hard man. That's what he's saying of God. God, you're a mean God. He didn't know his Lord very well. His heart was messed up. I was afraid. Verse 25. I hid my talent in the earth, in the world. And the Lord answered and said unto him, Thou wicked and slothful servant, thou knewest that I reap where I sow not, and gather where I have not strawed. And the result of that is they took the talent, in verse 28, from him, and they gave it to the guy who had 10 talents. Gave him a bigger reward. And they cast, verse 30, the unprofitable servant into outer darkness. Those are fearful verses of stewardship. God has delivered a lot of stuff into our lives. What talents has He given you? Just answer to yourself. What talents has He given you that you're not using? There are ministries that are needed here in the church. We need babysitters. We need Sunday school teachers. We need more people upstairs singing. I need a backup drummer. We need everybody with a talent to quit hiding it in the ground and get it out and start warming it up and get your instrument. If you know an instrument, we need more instruments upstairs. We need more singers upstairs. The church isn't supposed to be done by just a few people.
I wished I had those talents.
There's something. Notice. But there's something. And we'll come back to this when we're doing the church lesson. But there's something. He says, I have always given you something. One thing at least. Every man has received one thing. You can do something. There's people who are needed to be cleaning in the church. We've got outside work that needs to be done. The men have plenty of, anybody can pull weeds. There aren't any right now, I hope, but there's something for you. Everybody can pull weeds. We have to come to a point where we realize that God owns everything that we have. 1 Corinthians 6, 19 and 20 says, Ye are not your own. Everything that you have belongs to God. We need to begin to take a different mentality. In Deuteronomy 8:18, he says, He gives you ability to produce wealth. In Haggai 2:8, he says, all the gold and all the silver is His. Psalms 24:1, the earth and everything in it is His. Spiritual gifts are His. And in 1 Corinthians 4:7, he says, and many times we act as if we did it. We have it. And he said, where did you get that talent? Where did you get it? I gave it to you. A money talent or a talent, doesn't matter. I gave it to you. It's mine. And He wants us to come to an understanding in stewardship that it's all His. We need to return it to Him or be willing to return it to Him. The willingness to give it up. In this class, they actually did what is called a quit, Q-U-I-T, a quit claim deed. When they got you to a point where through Scripture that you understood that it's all God's, they actually got a form out. They gave it to each person. You take it home. It's private. And you're basically to say, God, I quit claiming this. My car is yours. My house is yours. My money is yours. My talent. And you are to write it all down, what you're going to quit claiming for yourself. That is, ow.
It's everything.
That's more than powerful. It hurts. When you think about, wait a minute, God, I bought that car.
But He provided.
I worked 40 years to get that house. To pay off all those payments. God is saying it's mine. I want you to get to the point where you're into that mentality. It's a different mentality. I wrote it down. It's like a soldier's mentality. When a soldier goes off to war, he basically does a quit claim deed. He doesn't own his life anymore, does he? He can be ordered to do anything. He no longer owns his own clothes. He no longer provides his own food. In a sense, the government or the army provides everything for him, but his life is turned over to someone else. He doesn't get to do anything he wants. He has to be ready to give up his life. The servant is the same way. A servant is to keep his eyes focused on the master. And when the master probably even looks a little bit uncomfortable, it's like, what can I do? Can I fan you with a fan? Do you need some candy, some sugar? What do Master, what can I do for you? You're to wait on him, be ready. Your life isn't yours anymore. You probably have a uniform. You ever seen these old films where in England they got these servants, and they're standing there real quietly and just waiting on the family that owns them in a sense. You can leave. You don't have to be a servant. But if you're going to be a servant, you take on a new attitude. A totally different attitude. The steward is the highest servant. He's the servant over the others. He's the overseer of the other servants. He controls the owner's wealth at times. He's the guard. Now I've gone way over time. Let's get to the last 15 minutes of class and we're going to not make it. This, to me, is a blessing. This gets ouchy here, gets really ouchy here. When we realize that it isn't just a tenth that he owns, it's really everything. And he wants us to come into this realm where we really call him Lord. With all of these blessings, there is a danger. And I believe this, covetousness, is the key spirit that is over America. There are spirits, I think, over certain cultures in the world. And we know from Scripture in Daniel that there are angels, principalities and powers over certain areas. And those angels or powers tend to have certain characteristics to them. We have been so blessed in this country, so blessed. The poorest person in this country is richer than the middle class and rich in many other countries. A poor person in this country is labeled at $14,000 income for a family of four. $14,000. $14,000 is well above the average of the world. well above. We have been so blessed, but with those blessings comes these dangers.